Good morning and welcome to the Family Support webinar for agency coordinators for December. My name is Nicole Lohr and I am a pre-K specialist with the Department of Early Learning. So we're going to go ahead and get this webinar started. So today on the webinar we will do a short focus on the family stability pillar. We will talk about coaching to executive function and do some follow-up on that from the last webinar. We'll also talk and do some discussion about reflective supervision and then also peer-to-peer staff development at the end. Okay, so let's do a really quick overview of the family stability pillar. So one of the reasons why we are focusing on the family stability pillar at this point is it is the pillar that has the most assessment questions in it. And so we're going to take some time and just talk about each one of the levels of the family stability pillar and then also look at the additional questions that are on there on the assessment. Okay. So we'll start with level 1. So we're on the bridge right now, and we're looking at the family stability pillar. So under the family stability pillar, obviously there are the two sub-pillars. There's housing, and then there's family independence. So the first one for level 1 would be for the housing sub-pillar. Level 1 would be a family that's homeless or in an emergency shelter or living with family or friends or living in a transitional housing temporarily. And for level 1 in family independence, it means that they identify that they're not able to engage in work, school, and family life because of children or family needs. Family stability level 2, housing looks like full housing subsidy, permanent housing. And for family independence, it's barely able to engage in work, school, and family life because of children or family needs. So as we go up in the levels, you can see that that they change just a little bit. So for housing level 3, it's partial housing subsidy. So if the family has just part of their housing costs covered by subsidy. And then we also have for family independence that they're somewhat able to engage in work, school, and family life because of children or family needs. And again, this is identified through the conversation that you're having with, or the conversation that your staff are having with families. Okay, really quickly, level 4 would have a family identifying that they have no housing subsidy, but that their housing costs exceed 1/3 of household gross pay. That means they're paying a lot of money out of their earned wage to be able to afford housing or to be able to live in housing. And then in family independence, level 4, it means that they're mostly able to engage in work, school, and family life, and children or family needs are nearly met. Okay, and now we're at the top level 5, and that's where a family would identify that they have no housing subsidy and that their housing costs are less than 1/3 of household gross pay for housing. And if a family identifies themselves at level 5 in family independence, that means that they are fully able to engage in work, school, and family life, and that their children or family needs are met. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about the 5 different levels, we're going to focus on each one of the sub-pillars. So this is one of the places that I'm going to unmute you all, so I hope that you're ready for that. But before I do that, I'm going to just discuss the top 3 points that we have here. So in this sub-pillar, staff open conversations with families about their housing situation, obviously. And then often staff may already know some details about the family's housing when they are doing enrollments. Those kinds of things often come up. So this is one that they may know some information, like they may know that they've got permanent housing, but they may not know if a family has subsidy for that or not, or whether it exceeds 1/3 of the household gross pay or not. So we also know that families may be comfortable or happy with where they are on the bridge, even if they find themselves at a level 2 or a 3. So that's also something that can happen when we're talking with families about this. right. Hello, everyone. It sounded like I had an echo there for a second, but I think we're good now. So when you're working with staff and they're helping, if they've helped any families identify any housing goals, does anybody have any examples of short-term or long-term housing goals that are coming up?
We have a family advocate working with the staff who is living with family, and it's not a great situation at the moment. And so some of their short-term goals are, getting a Section 8 application, filling out the Section 8 application, calling around to different apartment managers to see what the availability of an apartment would look like. And so those are pretty, attainable short-term goals that they're checking off to make it to that bigger goal.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's what you're asking for.
Yeah, great. So, so right now, while they're in ECAP and they're working through the family support pilot, they're really focusing on those short-term goals, and then they have an overall. What would you say their overall long-term housing goal is?
I mean, their overall long-term goal would be to purchase their own home, but that's a pretty big goal right now. So we've broken it down more into, some more manageable steps and really focusing on just getting them in a unit of their own at this point.
Okay. So overall, the kind of obviously they have a few short-term goals about, putting in an application for Section 8 housing, and maybe like a middle-term goal would be to get a place of their own, and then a long-term housing goal would be to purchase their own home.
Purchase their own home, right. And then there's a lot of goals with savings and things that go along with that. That's why that's such a big picture goal, and we're kind of focusing on those smaller steps.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that? Any other examples? Thanks, Amy. Okay, so what the last question here, I realize I haven't done any questions about that yet. So let's just pause and have a discussion about this. So let's think about what's the difference between assessing a family's self-satisfaction and assessing self-sufficiency. So I know that like I said, folks may be comfortable if they find themselves on level 2 or level 3. So does anybody have any ideas about how they can approach this with families, or what the difference is between, okay, I'm happy here versus am I self-sufficient here? And how do you balance those, I guess, is my question.
Can you hear me, Nicole?
Yes, I can.
This is Jennifer from Kybee.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. So this conversation came up with some of our parents. We have some very young parents that are living with their own parents still. And one of them that we talked to was very, very satisfied with the conditions right now. But we did have a discussion about, well, what about the future? Your parents won't always be able to take you in. There'll be a time that you'll have to do it on your own. And so those are some really good conversations about making goals and taking care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Jennifer, do you find, do you think, do your staff find that that if they're feeling happy in a specific area, like I guess housing is a really great example of this, but if they're feeling happy or satisfied themselves with a specific level, even if it's a lower level, are they more likely to pick a goal in a different area and want to focus on that, or are they still kind of focusing on housing?
Most of ours are picking areas that are really sort of a safe topic to talk about.
Sure.
And I think, if we look at the big picture, it's a lot less stress for them if they are living with somebody else and they don't have to deal with that part. And so but we're trying to get them to expand their thinking and their ultimate, where do they want to be? What do they want for their kids? And sort of get them to dream a little bit.
Mm-hmm. What kinds of questions or conversation starters are your staff using to kind of get that thought process started? Anyone else can jump in here too if you want. So obviously, asking kind of future-oriented questions. I heard you say, Jennifer.
Yeah. Just basically what I was saying, just getting them thinking about, well, what if something happens to your parents and you have to support your family? Are you thinking about the future and how this is going to happen, and what are you going to do, and will you be able to live here? Just getting them really opening up their minds a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this conversation also reminds me a lot of. I'm looking for the right wording from the empath training, but this is what I feel like Megan and Nikki were talking about with building the capacity to aspire, I think was the word for it, and how that's something that we have to help families do is that long-term housing goal of buying your own house may seem like an impossible task at this point. So how do we help families build that capacity to aspire when they are living with their family right now and can't move out on their own yet, let alone buy their own house. So really great kind of thought about that. So with that said, okay, hang on. Before we move on, sounds like James's microphone is not working, so I'm just going to read his. So in answer to the questions, he's saying that their families at Puget Sound ESD have mostly been satisfied with their housing situation, but the biggest eye-opener for them is how they've started thinking about starting a savings account. And some families have spoken about how this could be a door opener to better housing, better jobs, etc. Good point, James. Yeah, so if they're starting a savings account, a lot of these things, bigger kind of future-oriented goals, that'll help with that for sure. Good point. Okay, so as you've worked with staff leading up to the first assessment, are there any specific things that you've helped staff try to understand or understand the difference between rating a family's self-satisfaction in an area versus rating their self-sufficiency, and has that been an issue at all? Okay, I'm not hearing many responses to that. So I think maybe we'll just move on to the next question. So the next question, this one is really, we're going to look at this this is going to be a common theme when we look at all the pillars on the bridge. But what I really want to have a discussion about is how do you help staff when they give you feedback that parents may be rating themselves high in an area they don't feel comfortable discussing, just so they can, kind of either not focus on it or because they don't have a relationship built with that staff member yet. Are you hearing this happen? And how do you help staff if you are hearing this happen? So I think when we are looking at this question, let's move over to the family independence, because I feel like housing is a little more concrete. Like you can say, I'm in a full housing subsidy, permanent housing, and that's my situation. And yeah, I feel satisfied about that, but that's also related to self-sufficiency. So let's talk a little bit more about family stability because it's a little more open-ended. So families, a lot of these questions that we're asking, that staff are asking families in the family independence area, families may not feel comfortable sharing some information with staff right away. Staff may already know some details about some of these areas, but through their conversations, you know, they and building that relationship, they may learn more, or it may be an area that families really don't feel comfortable in. So, so why don't we, instead of answering the question that I just asked, why don't we give some examples of family independent goals that that you've been hearing from staff or that you've seen, and then we'll go back to the other question. So does anybody have any examples that they can think of from their staff that are family independent goals? Okay, I may start calling on people. I hope you don't feel offended by that. But let's see, I would, is it okay to ask you, Linda, are you on the line, Linda Crowner?
Yes, I am.
Okay, have you heard any examples of family independent goals?
You know, not really. Most of our families are wanting the ESL classes, the college classes, you know, a healthier lifestyle. We have a lot of refugees that want the driver's license. A lot of the main goals are also saving money. I mean, they can't do anything, you know, buying a house. They have to save that money before they can even buy the house. So that's, you got to start at that step first. So I think they're setting goals that are more attainable within a short period of time instead of these long, big goals. I don't know if that makes sense.
Sure.
Finding a job, we're helping them write resumes, getting references for, you know, get your references together, make sure you have good transportation, secure some childcare before you can find a job. That's the what we're working on. I haven't really seen any of the family and independence pillar at all.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a question for, so let's see, I lost my train of thought there, sorry guys. So does anyone else have an example of a family independence goal? Linda, I think I might have heard maybe the hint of one in your answer, and that's transportation. I know we asked a question about transportation under family independence, which is, you know, I think you bring up a really good point. Like, there's this overarching goal of it might be in a different pillar, like getting a different job, but that you're using those kind of short-term goals to build towards that. So first you have to find transportation, and then you have to find childcare, and both of those might fall under family independence. But what you're really looking at is getting a new job.
Correct.
Nice. Okay. Does anybody else have examples like that too? James, are you on the phone now? I think you might have switched from your microphone to your phone.
I did. I figured out how to call in.
Yay! Welcome. Sorry your microphone wasn't working earlier.
Yeah, it's the weirdest thing, but thanks.
Okay, so let's go back now. Actually, let's go forward to this is a copy of the assessment from ELMS, and so you can see under the family stability pillar here, there's a lot more questions that go into it. Obviously, you guys know this, but we're really looking at housing. That's its own subpillar, and then under the family independence subpillar, you know, there's basic household needs, access to transportation, legal issues, conflict resolution, managing parenting stress, developing parenting skills, school involvement and advocacy, and then the overall question about how they feel they're able to engage in their lives based on these things. So when we're talking with families about this, there's obviously, you know, a few that families may not feel comfortable with. Like, I think the traditional ones, well, not traditional since it's only been a year, but last year the ones that kind of hit as being a little bit more uncomfortable were legal issues, conflict resolution, you know, maybe even managing parenting stress. Those things are a little bit more difficult to talk about with someone that you've just maybe just met in the last few months. So going back to my question, what do you have in place right now that helps, or what do you want to have in place that helps your staff engage in these difficult conversations with families, and if they are not willing to talk about one of these questions, or saying everything's fine with this one, let's move on. How are you supporting your family support staff in these kind of uncomfortable areas?
Hi, this is James. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, James.
Hi. Yeah, for us, this was definitely something that our family support staff had expressed issue with, and it was definitely along the lines of their comfort level, feeling like they didn't have the kind of relational rapport that they needed to have with the family to have those conversations. So that, so we've actually had a couple of sort of in the moment motivational interviewing kind of conversation or talks with them, and thankfully their supervisor is also familiar, so she was able to support them around this being really an opportunity to provide options for families, and not to see it as necessarily an invasive task, but more so this is an opportunity to provide those options that families couldn't necessarily see before.
Okay, great. So some kind of in the moment redirection of thought, like towards motivational interviewing, and would you say that helped that situation, or is it still kind of a work in progress?
It's still kind of a work in progress, but for a few particular situations, it sounded like their supervisor was able to kind of give them support in that moment and help them sort of reframe how they were thinking about approaching their families.
So is there anyone on the line, Linda, I might have to call you out again, I'm just going to warn you here, but is there anyone on the line that did this, did the mobility mentoring last year, whose staff are feeling a little bit more comfortable this year with it, or are your staff still feeling like there's a lot of difficult conversations that they're having with families?
No, the more they are able to use the tool, it gets easier as it goes on.
Okay.
We just have. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And we have monthly meetings with the family support specialist, and we talk about difficult situations, difficult conversations, and so they kind of feed and bounce off of each other and get ideas on how to ask parents without being intrusive. So it's a lot of work together, and then I met with them one-on-one as well, and have individual conversations and coaching as well.
Okay. So I'm hearing that potentially that both, obviously what James had said about one-on-one and really giving that kind of training or in-depth support to staff as it comes up, and then just maybe understanding the mobility mentoring themselves. And I know probably the same kinds of questions came up for those folks that that piloted FDM last year as well. But like is Amy Robbins still on the line? Amy, are your staff feeling more comfortable, or are they still trying to relearn, or not relearn, but are they still trying to learn the mobility mentoring approach as compared to FDM?
I don't think they're struggling, no. It's just, I think the difference is focusing more on that financial piece of it, and I just think that's across the board for the whole entire group. Head Start ECAP, is making some goals that focus more on financial stability, not, like getting a library card or eating dinner, or, those kind of goals that are important, but not as important as their future financial stability.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. So I'm hearing, staff need to be comfortable themselves with the assessment and the bridge, and that involves some training. And also some, there's some longevity there too with using the more often that they're using the tools, the more comfortable that they're getting with it. So the next thing that I'd like to pop into is kind of following up on our conversation on executive function from the last webinar, and then that will lead us to a discussion on reflective supervision and how that's either going or how we feel we can use that with staff. So last month we discussed an overview of coaching to executive functioning skills. We did a little overview of executive function and then had a couple of examples near the end of how staff could work with families to build more executive function skills. So a couple of case studies. So the first thing that I want to ask for agency coordinators to share, kind of thinking about the executive functioning and having Carrie, who does the Families Moving Forward training, present on our webinar last month, is for those of you that are also using Families Moving Forward, what kind of parallels are you or your staff seeing between the Families Moving Forward curriculum and the Family Support Pilot, and how is that affecting the work with the families? Anybody on the phone call that is using the Families Moving Forward with families?
Yes.
Yes. Are you seeing any parallels at this point, or are you still just trying to think about that?
I'm still trying. I mean, we haven't provided a fall Families Moving Forward session yet, so I just did it the last spring. I think that, there are some definite parallels, Nicole, in that areas where families are struggling, and I think I talked about this early on. Is it's interesting. Are we working with the parents on their children's executive function skills or their own executive function skills? And I guess that's something I'm still struggling with in my own mind to some degree. So I definitely know and think there's parallels. I'm just not very able to succinctly talk to them, I guess, right now.
Sure.
That's not helpful at all.
No, I think that's a great conversation to have, because I think, I sat in on one of the Families Moving Forward trainings as well, and, it is, I think Carrie would probably say, too, that while you are focusing on building children's executive function skills, parents are learning about executive function skills, and then being able to kind of self-reflect and say, oh, maybe I need to work on working memory or something like that. But I think also that, that mobility mentoring kind of has that overall piece of trying to build executive function skills in parents just by its nature. So I'm curious to see what other folks have to say about this too. Are you, do staff kind of feel the same way at your organization, that, a kind of confusion on, are we trying to build skills in children, or are we trying to build skills with parents, or both?
Nicole, this is Jennifer from Kaibi again.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi. So we are just starting. The pilot's new to us, and I have a new FSS this year, and so I will be able to share more with you after we have our Families Moving Forward sessions. We're going to start those up at the end of January. So it will be interesting to see how this all rolls together, and I'll, like I said, be able to share more after we're done.
Great. Yeah, I think that's also a good point, is that maybe if you're first starting the pilot or first starting Families Moving Forward, that you haven't had the that interaction with families yet to kind of see what does fit together and what doesn't. So maybe that's just kind of a rhetorical question for this point in the year to just kind of keep in mind as we're going through the year, to see how those two kind of fit together and how they play off of each other. So I'm going to pop back for a second just to a couple of comments that we have in the comment box. Mary Schauer from ESD 101 is on the line also, but her audio is not working. So she just wanted to say that she wanted to echo what Amy Robbins shared about the financial pieces and how they're a bit different than our past experiences. So that's really good for you know, prepping staff, and you know, that this is a lot more, this approach is a lot more focused on financial stability as it relates to overall self-sufficiency. So thanks, Mary. And then the other thing that she said also is that a strategy that they use to work with families in the beginning is to work with families that they have a relationship with first. So maybe returning families is what I'm thinking with that, and it helps to build the relationship, and that takes time. So, and then that also, I think I've heard from last year that if you start with, if a family support worker starts with a family that they're more comfortable with, then or that they already have that relationship with, then it's easier to start the year that way. That's a good strategy. Okay, so one of the other things that I want to ask about, if you can just kind of brainstorm with me, and I have a few examples on the next slide, but just to kind of get the question going, is when you're thinking about supporting family support staff in this approach, what pieces of mobility mentoring highlight executive functioning for you?
Hi, this is James.
Hi, James.
For me, and I think our staff kind of alluded to this too, but definitely the health and wellness pieces, as well as the family independence pieces, kind of alluded to that executive functioning, and it was for both their child as well as themselves. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So the health part under the well-being pillar,
Yeah.
that starts with it. Okay. Great.
Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that is because of the they were able to talk about things like managing or self-regulating, managing things like anxiety, and that really that really reflected a lot of the parents' experiences.
Right. So just a conversation about how to or about managing anxiety hits on a couple of different ideas in executive function.
Right.
Okay. Great. And just for a little reminder, just in case anybody you know, like a little short reminder, what the three areas that are identified with executive function are impulse control, working memory, and mental flexibility. So I could definitely see, James, your example would definitely hit on, depending on the person, I guess, impulse control and working memory for managing anxiety. I know a lot of folks who are operating at a high level of anxiety. You know, the first thing to go is well, for me sometimes, even personally, you know, first thing to go for me is my memory. You know, having to remember certain appointments or things like that. So you know, that's a good example. And then you know, impulse control naturally could do that as well. Does anybody have any other examples of what pieces of mobility mentoring might highlight some executive functioning skills? Okay, so I'm going to go on and just give a couple more examples just to continue the follow-up on this. So naturally, mobility mentoring is, it's built to be family-directed engagement. It's built to have co-investment, and it's built to have coaching. And those things in itself, like if you take family-directed engagement, number one, we may be having these conversations with families who who feel like the system that they have been done to a lot. So if we are helping empower families by saying, this is something that that you're directing, then that might start to give them a more sense of control and be able to focus a little bit more on some more executive function skills. And I think coaching in its nature also kind of hits to that. I know, at the beginning of a coaching relationship, it might be, it might be just working on building that relationship. But as we work towards, building that after we build that relationship with families, then we can really, highlight with them that this is a co-investment thing. I'm as invested in this as you are. I want your success as much as you do too, and we're going to work together on that. I think that really helps build that. Oh, and I just had someone add a comment here. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask again. Okay, obviously I need to work a little bit on mental flexibility, but anyway, so Mary is saying she's thinking of goal setting and follow through also. I see that I really want to help staff make a connection between executive function and the process and follow through of the mobility mentoring activities. Great, thanks for that, Mary. Yeah, and that's a perfect segue, because that's the next piece that I was going to talk about, is focusing on self-reflection, using the bridge, helping identify SMART goals. I think a lot of that, there's a lot of executive function skills embedded into those processes for sure. Okay, are there any other ideas on this? And what are your thoughts on how you can help staff in building the capacity to coach to executive function skills? Or is this something that you're still working on or need ideas in? Mary, I know you said your audio isn't working, but you say you're thinking of goal setting and follow through, and that you really want to help staff make a connection between executive function and the follow through of mobility mentoring. So if you have any other ideas on how you would like to do that, go ahead and type them into the box. I'd love to hear about it. Anyone else? Is this something that you haven't really thought about yet in this process, or something that you would like to build on? Let's see. So Mary says that she, when she's working with staff, she'll start to intentionally call it out and try to get the staff to make the connection. So she'll focus on this and get staff ideas during their time together. Okay, so it sounds like that you are going to try and start this process and just kind of start asking the questions and see what staff have to say about it and what questions they may have. And are there any types of resources or any ideas that you guys how we could support you in that? Oh, not hearing anything. Okay, let's move on then. So let's see, our next piece is reflective supervision, and for, I know I just looked at the time and we're at about 9:50, and I know there's a few of you that may need to pop off. I keep saying that I don't really like you saying that. They might have to get off of the phone call in a few minutes, so if you do, you can go ahead and do that. So reflective supervision. So some of the key points that, when reading about and implementing reflective supervision are, that it needs to occur consistently, frequently, and over a period of time. that it's a partnership, that you use work together using reflection and goals also, and then that it also includes understanding, you know, kind of the uniqueness of each situation and experience. These are just, you know, obviously a couple of small points about it, but let's keep these in mind when we go into the discussion questions. So really what I'd like to ask is, if you supervise your family support staff, so if you are the direct supervisor for them, how have you used reflective supervision? And then for those of you that aren't the direct supervisor of your family support staff, how have you used reflective supervision differently than if you were their direct supervisor?
Well, this is James. For me, I do not directly supervise. So what we've done is we've had a few or a couple of meetings, kind of both with the staff and their direct supervisor, who is already using aspects of reflective supervision. So it becomes sort of more of that conversation, more of like a staffing regarding you know, any issues that they're bumping on, just getting folks to talk out kind of how things are impacting their work, how their work is impacting their families, etc.
Okay. Do you have a specific example, James, that you did a staffing with a family support staff and their supervisor, and what kinds of questions or challenges came up?
Yeah, so kind of like what we were talking about in the training, one challenge early on was one of the staff people were, you know, they were affected by seeing where they were on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually, it was their supervisor who chimed in and spoke about, you know, or started asking those questions, prompting around, you know, how do you think that impacts your family, that family that you're going to be doing the assessment with? How do you think you can, you know, that could be useful in your conversation with the family, that sort of thing. So, and it was kind of nice to be able to just see their process of how they have that conversation. And really, I was, in that moment, I was just there to, you know, add additional supporting comments and things like that.
Great. Do you find it, James, since you're talking right now, I'm just going to ask a question. I know you identified that you don't supervise your family support staff directly. So if because of that piece, have you found it a little bit more challenging to use some of the elements of reflective supervision yourself, or do you encourage their direct supervisors to use reflective supervision, or can you tell me a little bit more about that process?
Yeah, you know, actually, so it's really called to my attention the need for ensuring that supervisors have that level of skill and training.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, again, thankfully with the pilot staff, they do have a supervisor that can do that. But for me, it's making me think about ways to be able to expand on that for all of our family support staff and all of their supervisors, to be able to provide that that kind of training across our programs. So that's really where my mind has been landing. And if we're able to get there, it would certainly make it a lot less, or there would certainly be a lot less questions in my mind as to whether or not it's actually occurring.
Okay. So this has helped you determine that you may want to do more training with staff who supervise, regardless, like across the program. That's what I'm hearing.
Correct, and maybe even do some sort of, because you know, staff and their supervisors are busy during the program year, and it's difficult to give them a whole lot of training when they're already going to a lot of training, and so so thinking about ways to do this, like doing a pre-service or something like that in the summer.
Great. Thanks, James. Mary has also added a comment. She said that she does one-on-one calling or emailing with for staffing as needed, and then also small groups, and she tries to do that once a month. So an example that she has is working with staff to uncover open-ended questions to be able to converse deeper with families to support families in determining their goals and their next action steps. So it sounds like, Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, you can just type in the questions box. It sounds like you're facilitating either the one-on-one or the small group with your staff in a very similar fashion to how they would do open-ended questions with families. So maybe you're trying to facilitate and identify those open-ended questions that they can use. Okay. Yep. Okay. So that's what Mary's saying. She facilitates and tries to parallel model. Great. Yeah, I think that's really a key piece to that, to using reflective supervision tactics is that that parallel modeling, and that's really where that partnership piece comes into play. Is partnering together to do that, and being a model to your staff on how they can work with families. That's great. So really quickly, we've got just a couple of minutes left. It doesn't sound like we're going to get quite to the peer-to-peer learning, although Mary did bring that up a little bit with small groups, and that's a great way to have that peer-to-peer staff development. But let's really quickly, I want to ask if anybody has any other thoughts about reflective supervision and what kind of challenges there are in using reflective supervision, or if staff are just, or if you are feeling that staff really understand that process, and so what kinds of challenges are you seeing or not? All right. So I'm not hearing too much. Sounds like we've maybe gotten to the end of our discussion about reflective supervision for now. So what I'm going to do, though, is I have a few resources about reflective supervision, and that I found while looking for resources to help build the family support pilot. So I will share those with you on email, just because I know that we also have direct services staff members on Basecamp. Not that it shouldn't be shared with them, but I'll just start it with you guys. And then what I would also like is if anybody has resources that they are using on reflective supervision or similar topics that could help model to staff working with families. If you would just share them on that email by replying all also, that would be fantastic. So we can kind of start to build more of a library of sorts for supporting staff through this process. So that would be really great if you have any additional resources that you've been using. Books, articles, websites, specific trainers, all sorts of things. So it looks like we're at the end of our time. I know it sounded like maybe the registration said a different time that we were ending, but we're going to end this at 10 today. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to stay on the line and ask. And just to let you know that the next agency coordinator webinar that we're going to have is on Monday, January 9th. And then that's at 9 a.m. in the morning, just like this one. And then we are also having a direct services staff webinar that afternoon at 1 p.m. And the focus of that webinar is going to be motivational interviewing. So I will make sure and get those links out to you guys so you can start registering both for the agency coordinator one in the morning and to help staff and yourself register for the one in the afternoon. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll see if there's any additional questions.